Here's today's mentoring moment. Have you ever considered that the structure of a seed dies before it ever springs up and bears fruit? Here's the value in this lesson. There are some things that must die in us before we can ever step into it. One of the questions that was posed to me was, how did I know that it was time for me to step into what God was leading me to do? What God wants to do is get us to a place where we no longer desire it or feel like we need it. Because when it dies in us, that's when we can actually step into it. And here's the reality. There are some things in us that can be a hindrance and a detriment to our own growth. So God will hide us. He will allow us to remain hidden for a purpose. Think about John 15:2 when it says, He cuts away the branches that bears no fruit. The idea is not for Him to just cut away just to cut away. No, the idea is so that He can cut away that which does not bear good fruit so that we could be more fruitful. Let me tell you what happens when we don't submit to God's way. We begin to operate in a place no longer in faith, but we operate solely on our ambition. Another thing that happens is we move into a place where we feel like we have to prove something to ourselves or even sometimes to others. And the other thing is we compromise our own values to try to achieve it. The reality is that our timing is not always God's timing, but God's timing is always right. Times in our walk where God wants us to pause. And pausing allows us to take inventory and allows us to allow Him to cut away everything that is not bearing fruit in our lives. There are some systems, there are some patterns, there are some habits, there are some things in us that may have worked in the past but do not work in the current place in which God is trying to take you. So you have to be able to allow Him to cut away every area that does not bear fruit. And when we do, when we learn to submit to God's way of doing things, here's what happens. Favor flows effortlessly, and God orchestrates things without us trying to achieve it in our own power. So my encouragement today is to allow God to cut away. Don't reject His pruning. Don't reject His cutting. Don't reject the moments when He wants you to pause and take inventory, because there may be things that you do not see that need to be cut away in your heart and your motives and your way of doing things so that you can be more fruitful.